Hey everybody, it's Hoppy, and happy Father's Day to all you dads. I'm here sharpening my hatchet, just thinking about back to my father. He used to get so mad at me. He'd be looking for his hatchets and they'd all be dull, because I always had to stick them in trees, throw them, which they never did stick. They'd always hit the rocks and everything else. So now I have hatchets of my own, and I don't throw them, because these are the ones I use for my spoons. I had a good dad. Took me everywhere in the woods, introduced me to the woods. By introducing me to the woods, he introduced me to my own heart. He started my journey off to reconnect with myself. He didn't even know it. He was a hunting, fishing guy. He grew up in the streets of Kingston. His family is from up here in the mountains, and he always wanted to get back, but his mother and father had taken him. They were down in Kingston, and he had a good father, but his father, my grandfather, him and my grandmother split up, and he wasn't around a lot for my dad. So my father made up for that when he had us kids, when he had his own kids. And he was always like a big kid. When we were in diapers, he used to come around and he used to pretend we were wolf pups. And he used to come around and pick us up, those old cloth diapers. He'd pick us up with his teeth and he'd carry us around. He'd be crawling around on all fours and he'd carry us around as babies. And I can remember seeing him do that with my younger sisters. And he spent a lot of time with us. We didn't have a lot of money. We didn't have much money at all. And he was a hard-working man. So he taught me a lot through that. Let's work hard. Chainsaw, that reminds me of a time we were cutting a load of firewood when I was 17. I had a tree down over a sapling, and I cut that tree, and the sapling sprung up, and the sapling hit my chainsaw and it hit me right in here. The chainsaw cut from here to here, right down to the bone. And my dad would come over and he'd look at it, and he took my shirt and he tore my sleeve off and he tied it around my knee. And he says, "We're going to finish this load and then we'll take you to the store and we'll pick up some bandages and Mom will patch you up." We never went to the hospital. But all those things we did because we didn't have a lot of money, it made me stronger. And I'm grateful for it. Back in the day, some of the things he did, I'd be like, what the heck? But it all made me stronger. And he was a little bit old school, where he was with teaching me certain things. He was hard on me as a man, as a young boy, to teach me to be a man. And the one thing my father taught me is you don't use your strength to bully others. You use your strength to help pick people up. We live in a society, in a world where we put people down, where men use their strength to overpower others. My father wouldn't do that. If there was a man that thought he was big and that he was something, My father he didn't back away from any man, you know. He came at him straight on, and I've watched men back up from my father. I've heard stories in bar rooms about these tough guys and these badasses, and then I've seen them do something that made my father angry. And he taught me. He taught me. And he taught them. He taught them not to misjudge men. He was a gentleman to my mother. If he went somewhere, he held the door for her. He held her hand. He expected that from his son-in-laws with his daughters. His daughters were his prized possessions. Not even possessions, but the things he was gifted with being the guardian of and protector. And, you know, when I was a boy, I was fascinated by the stories of King Arthur and his round table. And I thought hard about that. And my father had friends around him, men that he thought highly of. And I paid attention to that. What was it about this man that my father he had great respect for? So I looked at the men that he had respect for, and then I had respect too. And I learned to see the qualities in a man that would deserve that. And then I learned to see there wasn't a lot of men my father truly respected. Which was, as a young man, was an eye-opener for me to try to reinvent myself as a man, you know. My father took it to a place, and he took me into the woods, and to him the woods was a place to hunt and fish, but he didn't understand because, you know, he was a Protestant, but he grew up, his spirituality was to the church. He didn't understand the connection to the woods, but he had it. He had that connection. As later in life, as my father got older, he would tell me, Hop, and I got into my spiritual journey. And he would say, hey, Hop, I see this black shadow running alongside me. And he goes, every time I look over, he goes, it's gone. But I see this black thing running alongside me, and I know it's the bear. And at the time, you know, that's where I was at. I was like, you know, animal spirits and such. And he was into that. He had a pagan heart. He had an earth heart. He had a connection to nature that he didn't even discover till later. And you know, back in the day, you went with the church, and that's what was laid out before you. You know, the church was there. They didn't know that you could have an alternative spiritual belief. So I was glad to share that with my dad. He had such a love for bears, and we both shared that. Yeah, he was you know, his name Howard, you know, when I was a kid, Howard, I wasn't really fond of the name, but it was my father's name. And, you know, I went to school, and some of the kids would call me Howie. I liked the name Hoppy, but it was a nickname I didn't earn. It was his nickname. because he loved Hopalong Cassidy. And yeah, the name Howard Leroy Quick Jr. That's my name. I say it proudly now because when my father passed, I really understood what that name was. It was his name. I didn't earn my own nickname. I was always Little Hop. My father taught me that men are made by their deeds. Not by how much money they have in their pocket or how much they own. Men are made by deeds. Chivalrous. Deeds of honor. Deeds of sacrifice. If you have something and somebody needs it, share it. It will make you stronger. If somebody's cold, you give them your coat and you endure the cold because it makes you stronger and your heart grows bigger. These are good lessons for a boy to learn. Seeing Dad take a moment to dance with your mom in the kitchen. When there was no money, kids were hungry. My father went out, he'd shoot a deer way after hunting season. He'd walk right down the middle of the road with a deer on his back and his rifle over his shoulder. State police would pull up and say, "What are you doing?" He'd say, "I'm feeding my kids." And he would say, "I know it ain't hunting season and you can arrest me, but I'm going to take this deer home and I'm going to cut it up and I'm going to give it to my kids." That's the man my father was. I'm getting sharp. All we can do is hope when you have a father like that, that I can be that for my kids. That's all I ever wanted to be. Best thing that ever happened to me in my life was watching my little girls be born and to come into my hands. They were the greatest gifts that you could be given, is your children. You could be a bachelor and you can hike mountains, you can travel the world, and you can do all these amazing things with your life. And you could tell these stories about how you went up Everest and you did that. But nothing compares to seeing your child being born. And I can't explain that to those men. But it is the most amazing experience. I don't even know if my kids understand until they have kids. But when I tell them that they are my greatest gifts in this life, like, Dad, Dad. You always get so teary-eyed. My father was like that too. Very sentimental, big-hearted guy. Yeah, so being a dad is like the coolest thing that ever happened to me. And having a dad that taught me to be a dad, like my father, was one of the other greatest gifts, was having him. I was a Boy Scout briefly because everything, the Boy Scouts that would come there, maybe their dads wouldn't take them out hunting, fishing, camping, teaching them how to whittle, teaching them how to put a stone on a hatchet head. My father did. And he did for a lot of other boys too. I lived the Boy Scout's life every day with my dad. So. And then as I became a man, my father gave me that respect. And he learned a little bit from me, I think, especially about spirit. Things that were in that was something that he never got to learn because, it was a different world where he came from. He didn't understand that you have everybody's spiritual belief is uniquely different. That we don't have to be put into a box and put into a place where you have to pick one or the other of these things, and that's all there is to choose from. That this was my choice. And my dad always had made that choice but didn't understand. He would work so hard and he would get overwhelmed with bills, and he would get overwhelmed. And the first place my father would take off was to the woods. And in the woods, he learned that there was peace, and then it calmed him down, and it made him refocus. And it took his son years later to explain, in my own spiritual journey, Dad, this is also church. This is also religion. This is your own personal religion. Your relationship with the bear, your relationship with the mountain, that is your spirit. And he got that immediately, it was like, and to have your father to be a son and have your father look at you and be like, like there's this connection there in that moment where he's like, yeah, I'm there with you. I understand that. I feel that. I've been feeling that for years and never understood what it was. And then to understand that you can go in the woods without hunting or fishing, that you just go in the woods to be in the woods. And he did that so much. He'd go into the woods hunting and he would come back with nothing. And he didn't really hunt. He was just in the woods. But there had to be that purpose, that you go into the woods to hunt. You go in the woods to fish. You go in the woods to hike the mountain. You don't just go in the woods to be in the woods, to experience God. So, yeah, to all you dads out there, I'm missing my dad. And to all you dads out there, I love and respect. And if you didn't have a good dad, be a good dad. You have a chance to break that chain. If you had something happen where your father was, and you have children, love them, hug them. You have a chance to be a good dad. And to change a cycle, maybe that happens in your family's life or history. Sometimes that's what it is. It's a bad dad creates a bad dad creates a bad dad, and it becomes a chain. But you have the chance to break that chain. And even if you haven't been that great a dad and you want to change it now, the first way you do that is go tell your children you love them. And it's humbling to say, I'm sorry, I want to be a better dad. It's okay to say that. And in that moment when you show that you really truly, you're humbling yourself in front of your children. I want to be a better dad. Well, then they're seeing you as a dad in that moment. Like, that's the dad they've been looking for. So everybody have a good day. Hope you get to spend the day with your children, grandchildren. I hope you get to remember the dads that came before us that maybe were really good dads, and have fond memories of them. And you know, the world goes around, and sometimes the kids, they get busy and stuff like that, but that's okay, because you're a dad. And it's about, just know that everybody's alive and well, you know? And whatever the day brings before you, you know, it's all good, all right? I'm gonna sit here and I'm gonna work on this spoon, and I'm gonna think of my dad. And I might even over sharpen this hatchet because I'm thinking of my dad and how mad I used to make him when I used to throw the axes. So I'll put an edge on this for you, Dad, because I messed up your other ones. All right?